What if a 25-year-old quarterback just walked into a billionaire owner's office and rewrote how NFL contracts work forever? Because that's basically what's being whispered around the league right now. This isn't just another free agency rumor, and it's definitely not a normal negotiation. Reports say a young star didn't ask for a deal, he delivered terms. Not suggestions, not a starting point, requirements. And the wild part, the owner on the other side wasn't just any owner. It was one of the most powerful decision makers in sports. Suddenly, this isn't about where a quarterback will play next season. It's about control, who actually holds the power in modern football. Teams used to decide everything. Players accepted or walked. But this situation feels different. Executives are nervous, agents are watching closely, and fans are arguing everywhere. Because if this works, the entire quarterback market might never look the same again. And it all started with one rumor. The story didn't explode because of a trade. It exploded because of a number. Word started spreading around league circles that a massive offer was floating behind the scenes. Not a normal contract, not a typical extension, but a move designed to completely pull a franchise quarterback away from his current situation. The kind of move that owners rarely even consider unless they believe a player can redefine their organization overnight. And suddenly, one team's future became another team's obsession. Around the same time, insiders began hinting that a certain powerhouse franchise wasn't just monitoring the situation. They were preparing something aggressive. This is an organization known for chasing headlines as much as championships. And historically, they've never been afraid to gamble big if they believe a star can become the face of football itself. That's where things got interesting. Because instead of quiet negotiations, the conversation turned into leverage. The quarterback reportedly wasn't waiting to be recruited. He was letting teams come to him. And instead of teams dictating structure, rumors suggested something far more unusual. The player was setting the framework before talks even truly began. Front offices immediately started paying attention. Not just because of the money, but because of what the move represented. Quarterbacks normally climb a ladder, rookie deal, prove yourself, then negotiate carefully. But this situation felt reversed. It felt like a young player operating with veteran superstar authority. Fans noticed too. Some believed a franchise was finally ready to do whatever it takes to land its next icon. Others believed the player was pushing boundaries no one had ever pushed before. But executives weren't debating the personality. They were debating the precedent. Because if one team agreed to extraordinary terms just to secure a quarterback, every future negotiation would change overnight. Agents would bring it up. Players would demand it. Owners would lose leverage they've held for decades. And quietly, multiple teams began watching the same question unfold. Was this just a bold negotiation tactic? Or the beginning of a completely new NFL power structure? What nobody realized yet was that the real shock wasn't the rumored offer. It was what happened when the meeting finally took place. When the meeting finally happened, the expectation was simple: a classic recruitment pitch. An owner sits down with a young quarterback, talks about legacy, championships, endorsements, global fame, the usual script. It's a routine that's worked for decades. Big franchises sell the dream, players listen, negotiations slowly begin. That's how these conversations always go. Except this time, it didn't. Sources say the owner opened exactly the way you'd imagine, highlighting the brand, the spotlight, the opportunity to become more than just a player. The message was clear: come here and you won't just play football, you'll become a global icon. For most athletes, that's the moment they lean forward and start asking questions. Instead, the quarterback reportedly did something that instantly changed the tone of the room. He didn't counter with excitement. He didn't ask about teammates. He didn't even discuss the playbook. He placed a folder on the table. And according to people familiar with the situation, what followed wasn't a negotiation, it was a declaration. Inside were terms, not flexible ideas, not hopeful targets, requirements. The room reportedly went quiet as the owner read through the pages. At first, confusion, then surprise, then something closer to disbelief, because this wasn't structured like a normal contract discussion. The player wasn't reacting to an offer, he was defining the partnership before it even existed. For decades, teams evaluated quarterbacks and decided how much control they deserved. Here, the order flipped completely. The quarterback was evaluating the organization. That alone was unusual. But what truly stood out wasn't just confidence, it was preparation. Every clause reportedly had reasoning behind it. Every demand connected to long-term stability, career protection, or influence over how his career would be managed. Instead of trying to earn trust later, he was asking for it up front in writing. The owner, known for commanding negotiations, suddenly found himself in unfamiliar territory. Rather than persuading a player to join, he was being asked whether the franchise itself could meet the player's standards. And that's when everyone who later heard about the meeting realized something bigger was happening. This wasn't a superstar asking for more money. This was a quarterback attempting to redefine the relationship between player and team. But the real shock wasn't the confidence. It was the specific demands inside that folder. The headline number alone was enough to shake the league. $200 million, fully guaranteed. Not partially protected, not dependent on roster dates, not tied to performance bonuses. The entire amount locked in the moment the contract is signed. In the NFL, that almost never happens. Teams build escape routes into deals for a reason. Injuries happen, performance drops, coaching staffs change. Contracts are designed to protect the organization from worst-case scenarios. This one reportedly removed every safety net. From the player's perspective, the logic was simple. Quarterbacks absorb hits on every snap. Careers can change in one play. If a franchise wants a long-term commitment, then the risk should be shared, not carried by one side only. Instead of betting on promises, he wanted security written into the agreement from day one. But the guarantees were only the beginning. The next clause was even more uncomfortable for front offices, a complete no-trade provision, not a limited list of preferred teams, not a conditional approval window, absolute authority to reject any deal. If the team wanted to move him, he would have to agree first. In practical terms, that shifts leverage permanently. Normally, a franchise quarterback anchors the roster, but the team still controls the exit door. Here, the door only opens if the player decides it does. Then came the injury language. Typically, if a player is released and signs elsewhere, the original team offsets what they owe by the new salary. This proposal reportedly eliminated that entirely. Even if another team paid millions, the original franchise would still owe the full contract value. For executives, that's a nightmare scenario, paying premium money for a player no longer on the roster. And still, the demands didn't stop there. The most debated part wasn't financial at all. It was influence. The quarterback wanted formal input on offensive direction, not calling plays, but approval over major system changes and involvement in selecting coaches working directly with him. The reasoning, according to reports, was consistency. If the team commits long-term, the environment around the quarterback shouldn't constantly reset. To older football minds, this sounded like giving away authority. To younger players, it sounded like accountability. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about salary anymore. It was about power, who shapes a franchise's future, the organization or the centerpiece player. By the time the pages were finished, the negotiation had transformed into something far bigger than a contract discussion. It became a test of philosophy. And that's exactly why the reaction across the league split almost instantly. Inside the building, the atmosphere reportedly shifted long before anyone discussed numbers. These kinds of meetings usually follow a familiar script. The owner presents the vision, talks legacy, championships, brand exposure, and the player listens. Questions come later. Negotiations happen after mutual excitement is established. It's almost ceremonial. But this one didn't follow the script. The pitch came first. The global fan base, the spotlight, the marketing power that turns quarterbacks into household names. The message was clear: joining this franchise means more than football. It means becoming a cultural figure. For decades, that pitch has worked because very few organizations can offer that level of visibility. Then the tone changed. Instead of responding emotionally, the quarterback reportedly redirected the conversation toward structure. Before discussing dreams, he wanted clarity. Before legacy, he wanted terms. The focus moved away from brand and toward business, and suddenly the room wasn't a recruitment pitch anymore. It was a negotiation table. What stood out wasn't aggression, it was certainty. There was no feeling out phase, no gradual escalation, no attempt to read the room and adjust expectations. The requirements were presented as a complete package, not a starting point. Either the partnership worked under those conditions or it didn't happen at all. That approach alone carried a message. This wasn't about convincing a team to believe in potential. It was about deciding whether the team fit the player's long-term plan. Observers around the league began calling it a role reversal. Normally, organizations decide if a quarterback is worthy of investment. Here, it looked like the quarterback was evaluating whether the organization qualified for him. And the owner's reaction reportedly reflected that shift. There was surprise, but also curiosity. After decades in the league, seeing a young player walk in with a fully structured framework, not just financial but operational, forced a different type of conversation. Instead of persuading a free agent, the discussion turned into understanding a philosophy. Questions followed, lots of them. Why insist on long-term system stability? Why eliminate contract escape clauses? Why formalize influence inside the building? Each answer pointed to the same idea: partnership instead of employment. A 5-year commitment should function like shared responsibility, not a one-sided gamble. The meeting reportedly lasted hours longer than expected, not because of haggling, but because both sides were trying to understand what this new type of negotiation meant. By the time it ended, nothing had been signed, rejected, or agreed upon. Yet the impact was immediate. Word spread quickly through agents, executives, and players. Because if one star could walk into a meeting and reshape the conversation, others might try the same. And that possibility made front offices across the league pay very close attention. The moment details from that meeting started circulating, the conversation escaped the building and took over the league. Front offices weren't just discussing one player anymore. They were debating a precedent. For decades, NFL contracts followed an understood hierarchy. Teams controlled structure, players negotiated around the edges, and quarterbacks, even elite ones, rarely touched organizational authority. But now executives were privately asking a different question. If one franchise accepts this model, how many others will be forced to follow? Some veterans inside organizations immediately pushed back. To them, the concern wasn't the money. Quarterbacks have been paid enormous salaries for years. The real fear was structural influence. If a player could influence coaching direction, contract security, and roster philosophy, then traditional power balance changes overnight. Teams rely on flexibility, the ability to pivot after injuries, bad seasons, or coaching changes. Remove that flexibility and risk multiplies. But a different reaction was happening among players and younger decision makers. They didn't see danger, they saw evolution. From their perspective, The quarterback already carries the franchise's success and failure on his shoulders. Careers can be shortened by one injury, systems change constantly, and coaching instability has derailed promising talents before. So if teams expect total commitment, why shouldn't the player seek total protection? Agents quietly supported that logic. Not publicly, but behind the scenes the discussion grew louder. If guarantees expand in other sports, and if quarterbacks generate the majority of revenue impact, then the structure eventually shifts. It's not rebellion, it's market adjustment. Fans split right down the middle. One side argued that giving a player this level of influence undermines the concept of a team. Football, after all, depends on hierarchy and coordination. They feared a locker room dynamic where one voice outweighs everyone else. The other side saw something different: accountability. If the quarterback has input, he also carries responsibility. Success and failure can't be blamed on coaching decisions he had no control over. In their eyes, it creates clarity rather than chaos. Meanwhile, rival teams quietly monitored everything. Because whether a deal happens or not, the leverage already changed. If a franchise refuses these conditions and another accepts them, the recruiting landscape shifts immediately. Players notice who adapts and who resists. Future negotiations start referencing this moment, even indirectly. That's what made executives uneasy. The situation stopped being about one off-season decision and became a potential negotiating blueprint. Every upcoming star quarterback discussion could begin with, "We've seen this structure before." And once that door opens, it rarely closes. Now the pressure isn't just on one team to decide. It's on the entire league to determine how much control a franchise quarterback should truly have. Inside the building, the real conflict wasn't about numbers. It was about identity. For years, organizations have operated under a simple philosophy: management leads, players execute. Even superstar quarterbacks rarely crossed into decision-making territory. They were the face of the franchise, but not the architects of it. Now that line was suddenly blurry, and the person forced to confront it first was the owner. Because agreeing to the demands wouldn't just sign a quarterback, it would permanently redefine how the franchise operates. On paper, the upside looked obvious. A young franchise passer changes ticket sales, national attention, sponsorship value, and locker room belief overnight. Teams search decades for stability at that position. When one finally becomes available, logic says you do almost anything to secure him. But leadership doesn't run only on upside, it runs on precedent. If one player gains influence over coaching direction, future stars will ask for input too. If one contract removes all flexibility, future negotiations begin from the same starting point. Suddenly, management decisions aren't isolated choices anymore. They become a standard you must repeatedly follow. That's where the hesitation lived. Because there are two timelines competing against each other. Short term, sign the quarterback, compete immediately, energize the fan base, chase championships. Long term, protect organizational control, maintain structure, avoid creating a model that's impossible to reverse. Privately, executives understand the harsh truth of the league. Elite quarterbacks don't appear often, and when they do, hesitation can haunt a franchise for decades. History remembers the teams that passed on greatness far longer than the teams that overpaid for it. Yet history also remembers contracts that crippled flexibility. This wasn't just a football decision, it was philosophical. Is a quarterback an employee or a partner? If the answer becomes partner, then authority must be shared. Shared authority means shared direction, and shared direction requires trust at a level rarely written into contracts. What made the situation more intense was timing. Windows to win championships don't stay open forever. Leadership knows opportunities shrink quickly in professional sports. Passing today could mean rebuilding tomorrow. So the decision narrowed to a single question: is maintaining tradition safer than embracing change? Because refusing the terms keeps control, but risks losing the player. Accepting the terms gains the player, but changes the power structure permanently. And whichever choice is made won't just define one season. It will define the franchise's future philosophy for years. What started as a single negotiation quickly became a league-wide situation. Because this was never just about one team and one quarterback. Front offices across the NFL were quietly paying attention, not to the destination, but to the outcome. If the deal happens, the market changes overnight. If it doesn't, the balance of power stays exactly where it has been for decades. Agents understood the stakes immediately. For years, contract talks followed a predictable rhythm. Teams held leverage early in careers, players gained influence later. It was a gradual climb toward control. But this situation skipped the timeline entirely. Instead of earning authority after multiple contracts, a young quarterback was asking for it up front. And that difference matters more than the money. If the terms are accepted, negotiations across the league shift from salary discussions to power discussions. Future quarterbacks won't just compare annual averages, they'll compare influence. Questions about coaching alignment, scheme stability, and organizational commitment could become normal parts of contracts rather than private promises. That possibility makes executives nervous. Not because teams dislike paying elite players, they already do that, but because influence is harder to manage than finances. Salary cap numbers can be calculated. Authority cannot. Once written into agreements, it reshapes how decisions are made inside the building. Meanwhile, players are watching for the opposite reason. Many believe careers can be defined by environment as much as talent. Coaching turnover, system changes, and rebuilding timelines often derail development. From that perspective, structured guarantees aren't just protection, they're stability. The request isn't simply control, it's security in a profession where situations change faster than performance. So the league found itself split into two viewpoints. One side sees a dangerous precedent that could complicate roster building. The other sees a natural evolution of star value in a quarterback-driven era. And then there's the competitive angle. If one organization refuses and another accepts, the reward is massive. Landing a franchise quarterback instantly alters a team's trajectory. That means every hesitant decision indirectly strengthens a rival willing to adapt. In a league defined by small margins, philosophical stubbornness can turn into competitive disadvantage. That's why even teams not involved still care deeply about the result. Because the outcome answers a bigger question: who actually holds leverage in modern football? For decades, the system gave organizations the final say. But if this negotiation ends with full agreement, it signals something new. Elite quarterbacks don't just join teams anymore. They choose partnerships. And once that idea becomes normal, it won't go back. Now everything comes down to one moment: the response. Because after all the meetings, the numbers, the speculation, and the debates, the situation eventually becomes simple. An owner either agrees or walks away. And in this case, both choices carry consequences far beyond a single season. From the organization's perspective, saying yes changes how the franchise operates internally. A contract like this wouldn't just be a financial commitment, it would be a philosophical shift. Leadership structures that existed for decades would suddenly include a player's voice in areas normally reserved for management. Not control of the team, but influence strong enough to matter. And that's where hesitation naturally appears. Teams aren't only protecting cap space, they're protecting hierarchy. Football organizations function on clear lines of authority, and altering that balance introduces uncertainty. Even if the player performs at an elite level, the structure itself becomes new territory. but refusing the deal carries its own risk. Because if the quarterback signs elsewhere and succeeds, the decision becomes permanent history. Every win, every playoff run, every highlight becomes a reminder of a moment when adaptation was possible but rejected. In sports, legacy is often built as much on the players you didn't acquire as the ones you did. So the decision stops being about negotiation tactics and becomes about belief. Does management believe the player is worth reshaping tradition? Or do they believe success must come strictly through established methods? At the same time, the quarterback faces a different calculation. Accepting less would follow the traditional path: enter the system, prove value over time, and earn leverage later. Pushing for terms now challenges that timeline completely. It's betting that long-term stability matters more than short-term approval. Neither choice is safe. One risks locker room dynamics and media scrutiny. The other risks missing an opportunity that may never return. That's why negotiations like this rarely stay private for long. Uncertainty creates attention, and attention creates pressure. Around the league, executives quietly wait because the final answer sets a tone. If agreement happens, future talks change immediately. If it collapses, teams regain negotiating confidence moving forward. So the real weight of this decision isn't contained inside a contract folder. It's contained in what comes after. Because once the choice is made, the conversation ends and the consequences begin. And that's why this story was never just about one contract. It's about a moment where two eras of football collide: tradition versus player empowerment. One side built the league structure, the other represents where the league might be heading. Whoever bends first doesn't just settle a negotiation, they set a precedent. If the deal happens, future quarterbacks won't quietly wait their turn anymore. They'll arrive prepared to define their role from day one. But if it falls apart, teams send a message that authority still lives firmly inside the front office walls. Either outcome reshapes expectations. For the franchise, it determines whether they evolve or protect identity. For the quarterback, it determines whether betting on self-worth leads to opportunity or forces a different path. And years from now, people probably won't remember every stat from the season that followed. They'll remember the decision, the moment both sides had to choose between comfort and change. Because sometimes the biggest plays in football don't happen on the field. They happen at the negotiating table.